Destiny, Rise of Iron. Our review's up. I did a review in progress on release day after you had done a 10-hour live stream. I played less of it that morning, but then, got up my initial opinions, which I think we aligned more initially.
Yeah.
And then the farther into it we got, the more our opinions diverged.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just I think we both felt the same way. Everything leading up to the raid, I didn't dispute the kind of the score that you were like hovering around at that time, which is ultimately the score you gave it, and I could see that like the slog or the grind of after you get through most of the story, which was good again but short. After that, it's kind of like this slow process of slowly leveling in the hopes that you can then get to the raid. And when you get to the raid, which is something you did and I did, I thought it was a pretty great raid. There's probably like one boss that I didn't care too much for, but it's all a perspective of like how much does that raid impact you, right? Like, is that enough to elevate it to a 7?
Yeah.
Is it not? And that's kind of where I think our paths kind of forked in the road, so to speak. But,
Without spoiling too much, what do you think of like the raid bosses and the mechanics of the raid?
Sure, I thought it was fun. I mean, it was. I don't know if it's just because me and some of the guys that I raid with normally just haven't raided in a while, but the genuine excitement of kind of going into it together, for the most part blind. I did look up some strats and stuff like that, but like actually doing some of those things, like the raid mechanics and whatnot, it was like pretty refreshing, pretty fun. It was, some of it is tied into like what you did before the raid, like in the strikes and stuff like that, but not all of it. Like some of those mechanics lend itself into the raid, but I thought the raid was a lot of fun. I think the mechanics were fun. I think visually some of the set pieces in there are just like stunning. I'm just like, wow, that just like blow me away. Like, and I don't want to get too spoilery with it, but there are some areas like within and inside and outside of the raid that are like pretty crazy.
I wish there was a strike in this expansion that kind of used the same assets and aesthetic and kind of general idea of this raid, because the closest they got was the Anarchy Heist. I think I'm screwing that up with the ogre and the archpriest strike.
Sofogoth
like
again? The other one. Yeah,
the new
yeah,
one.
The
actual new one that's not a reskin.
Yeah.
Which was a good strike in my opinion. I like that boss fight. It's nothing like spectacular, but it's like the ogre's attacking you. You realize pretty quickly he's immune the entire fight. So then you have to kill the archpriest while this ogre is charging you. I like that boss fight. I like the mechanic, the dynamic between those two.
And the level design for that one was pretty like different than most of the other strikes, because it had you going up and down and left and right. But yeah, it would have been kind of cool to see some of the more raid kind of like style in like a strike or something that maybe in the previous expansions, I feel like they kind of like led you towards the raid in a way, like
prepped you for it.
Yeah, it's kind of like, oh, like there's a specific, like one of the bosses you might fight, he runs away, you know, and you kind of have to go chase him down. And
or with Servitor, you have to move the orb while he's like rotating this wall. It's all about placement, kind of, which raids are often about like platforming and kind of being in the right spot at the right time and like actually not getting wiped in one hit. But it was one of the earlier bosses, again, without spoiling too much, earlier bosses in the raid that kind of, you're not just fighting it, you're also kind of using it as like transportation almost. It's not going to spoil it to call it. It's like the Death Zamboni.
The Death Zamboni.
And that's the name of the boss.
Death Zamboni.
Yeah.
Okay, I like this game now.
It's you should
have given it a 7.
You're Wayne Gretzky with a giant battle axe going at the Zamboni. Man. Don't clean my rink. No.
Okay, there's definitely none of that.
No, not at all. But yeah, what do you think of the strikes? Because like I said, I like the actual new strike, but Sepix Perfected, the one we see right here, is Sepix Prime, but just like now he's a splicer. Siva has infected him. They're trying to use Siva. We can talk more about like Siva being that nanobot plague that the Lords of Iron back in the day with Lord Saladin, who you'll see if you ever did like Iron Banner Crucible events. This all doesn't make sense. It's just like PvP stuff that happens on a weekly basis or whatever, like a scheduled basis. They go into the backstory with that. We can talk about the actual storyline campaign later, but Siva is this nanobot plague that plays into some of the strikes, and it changes the enemies, kind of like how the Taken enemies perform differently. I didn't feel like the Splicer enemies were that much different this time around. They were just buffed in terms of damage and defense.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you for the most part on that in that regard. That the Taken, when they had done the Taken, felt like there was more stuff happening with that than there is with the Splicers. So, and to talk about the strikes too, it does kind of suck a little bit that they were just kind of some rehashes. I mean, it's kind of hard regardless, but I mean, I still enjoyed the Sepix like encounter, that last encounter, even though it's kind of similar to what it was before, but some of the mechanics at least were kind of cool. It's like, you get a Scorch Cannon to then take a shield off. That's like something that you would see in like a MMO, you know what I mean? And the music during that like fight is just like amazing. I don't think enough people talk about how amazing the music is, even though that's just one small part of the game, but like that song is kind of the same as it was before, but like more like kind of metal and whatnot, and it's just like awesome. But the enemies didn't feel that much different this time around.
Even the Plague Lands, the new patrol zone, there was more to do, and it was a different area, but it was still very much just like the Earth from Destiny Year 1 and 2. I didn't feel like I was seeing anything new. Like the Dreadnought, I loved in Taken King. It was very much this like infested kind of foreign, like just derelict vessel in the middle of Saturn's rings that you were going into, and there's like new public events. That's when they introduced the
Court of Oryx.
Yep. And then there's Archon Forge in this one, which is kind of like a reworked Court of Oryx in a way, like max 9 player public event. I didn't feel like the Plague Lands were offering that much new, like for me to explore. I was exploring them mostly for that quest line where you're actually trying to complete all the missions for Shiro, the hunter.
Yeah.
What'd you think of like the new areas?
Well, yeah, I think part of the reason why the Plague Lands probably doesn't seem as cool when you go through it as just like an area is probably because you're going through a lot of that through the story, I would imagine. So you kind of go, oh, I kind of been here before, whereas it wasn't always the case with like the other expansions and whatnot. So I could see why that felt that way. And there is only one kind of like new patrol mission, which is a fun one because you get to use the axe, but I mean, like other than that, you're just kind of like killing stuff. And Archon Forge is an interesting concept. Well, not really, I guess, because it's
that's my sentiment with most of this expansion.
It's because it's like a watered down version of like Court of Oryx. They wanted something like faster paced, that like it resembled more of like a horde mode, not something that you had to be super strategic about.
Yeah.
It was more of like a lot of stuff's coming at you like frantically. You have a timer of 5 minutes. You have to kill stuff fast, and that's kind of the concept of that. But I think because it went from like you doing Court of Oryx, where there were mechanics of like, oh, if you don't bring the 2 knights together, you can't damage them, or there's 3 wizards. If you don't kill them all within a timely manner, they start to respawn. So like those probably seemed more interesting than just killing a bunch of stuff. But I don't know. Maybe some people like the horde style mode, so maybe that's why they went with it. Our Archon's Forge is kind of like and they didn't really do themselves a big favor because you can't stack those offerings. So people can't really chain them if you don't have them, or like if the group doesn't have them. Whereas like in court, like, you could be there with 3 people and you could just keep doing it and keep doing activities. But for whatever reason, they kind of like gated you from like doing them like over and over.
We were talking about it earlier with the Division, but with the update 1.4, it's apparently going to like revamp how you level up a little bit. With like, at least from my experience, someone who kind of had to catch up right before it came out with my light level, it felt very much more like a very, very gradual, like very grindy now with like, okay, I should equip all my, even if I don't like these guns, I'm going to equip my things to get my highest light. So next thing that drops will, ideally be higher light, lift my light level. And it was just like constantly playing that, getting in strike playlists and going through the same, few strikes. And obviously, which strikes work best and what would like drop the like class specific items and whatnot. But it felt, I know that the grind is part of Destiny. I do enjoy it initially, but after a while, this was just too much almost.
Yeah, this one was definitely a bit grindier than the ones in the past, but it's kind of part of it is because they came out with that April update, which was like the infusing of light kind of stuff, which a lot of people were happy about, right? And I think they wanted to carry that forward so you can still use the old items that you liked and bring them up to current light level. But I think in doing that, because you still have to get to like raid level, they probably had to find a mechanic to like buffer you from getting there too fast. Because if you get there too fast, then like, what do you have left to play, right? Like that's the thing with Destiny is that, yeah, you have your chores and stuff like that, but if you get to endgame right away, like in a week, which some people have, there's not much left to do outside of the stuff in the book, which again is still gated. Like you still can't finish that stuff unless like you do it. So it's like kind of like extending the life of it, but at the cost of kind of making players like grind through that stuff. Like it's kind of an unfortunate circumstance where like it's already hard enough to get a raid group, right? Because that mechanic's not necessarily in the game yet, but they have community sites and LFG stuff on their site to help facilitate that. But like to get to the light level to do that, which even was like a little bit of a struggle for you at first, because that is a slog a little bit, even though you are getting rewards, it's just minimal. Like it feels minimal, you know, and so it takes time. Like that is kind of shitty to me. Like I want more people to be able to do the raid, but then it's like, how do you find the balance? Like as a raid person, I feel like an elitist, and it's weird for me that Goob Shoe Ride, who's a GameSpot fan, is like almost as high light level as me, and has like he's done like only 2 parts of the raid. You know what I mean? Whereas in the past it was like, oh, you get to the point where you're stuck, you have to raid, and then you're either hired because of the raid. So then, like, where's the balance there, right? Like, do you try to... It's becoming more of a casual game, I feel like.
I mean, even if they kept it as extended as it is, right, it sounds like if the strikes were more original, and, like, especially the bosses that you were fighting, like, that sort of could have provided that balance that you're talking about, where it's like, okay, I'll take a longer raid if that's what it takes to keep me playing, if initially I was given things that were super interesting, but it sounded like you had to go through stuff that was recycled content to get to something that was just stretched out needlessly.
Yeah, well, even in the strike playlist, you'll be playing to like grind through the strike playlist, keep your strike bonus. You'll be playing strikes from year 1 and 2 because they're put into.
Gotcha.
Yeah. The Nightfall this week wasn't the new strike, right?
The Nightfall last week, was the new strike, but then this week it was like Winter's Run, but then they've changed it again to Saber now. But yeah.
So yeah, in general, it's not just like the expansions content is reskinned old content.
Destiny's
you're playing
nature.
old content as well in order to like. Successfully grind. Yeah.
The grind is real.
And then in terms of campaign, it's kind of the same thing as Taken King. It serves mainly to set up the late game quest lines or the exotic quest lines or the new quest givers, the new area, the new social area, the new patrol area, which is the Plague Lands in this case. Fellwinter Peak was kind of cool. It was just like aesthetically, it's like Game of Thrones kind of mixed with Lord of the Rings, that high fantasy stuff. The intro cinematic was gorgeous, but it was one cinematic. And then you beat the campaign in 90 minutes. You get the blade at the end, the exotic item. It's not really a spoiler. I think most people know that by this point. But there wasn't much context to the missions aside from what the quest giver told you at first. Again, like I didn't get into this just to play the campaign, but the campaign, like, you know, during marketing, everything before it looked pretty badass. And then I played it. It was just kind of, you know, like lackadaisical. I don't remember much of it. I like I love the Galahorn quest line. That last mission with Galahorn was great. Felt kind of like something out of Bungie's Halo days, like the scale of it. Then there's a few, I don't know, I didn't get Kvostok, the original rifle you get in Destiny, but the exotic quest lines, as always, were pretty entertaining, despite the fact that some of the quests in those lines were just like fetch quest patrol missions.
Yeah, but that's that's just how that kind of like how quests work. I never want to call Destiny an MMO, but like those patrol missions, those kind of quest line kind of stuff, like picking up medallions that are all over like the Playlands, that's a very like MMO thing to do.
Yeah, but it's not really worth giving it a pass though, right? I think it's a fair criticism to say it's like, yeah, it's traditional and that's kind of boring.
Sure, but I guess I have a different perspective on it. It's because it's like, yeah, I wasn't that thrilled about having to pick that stuff up, but it's kind of like you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and like it makes it. I don't know if it necessarily makes it more rewarding to know that I did all that to get the Galahorn, but you know that you earned it, right? And like you know that someone else that has a Galahorn went through that same thing. But yeah, and then the Kvostok thing was cool. Like there's like this heartfelt moment that if you've been playing Destiny since like year 1, like there's a nice little like little nugget of story, like intimacy between you and the ghost, and just like kind of like looking back at like, you know, the 2 years that you've been playing Destiny, and like, hey, you know, but
yeah. Group Shoe Ryan in the chat said, hey, wait, I got to Axis Phase 2. Check your facts, Eric Tay.
Yeah.
All right, so that is Rise of Iron. Yeah, the review's up on GameSpot. Gave it a 6 out of 10. I think it's worth playing if you want to grind and you want to get the new gear. Obviously, if you're a hardcore Destiny fan, the raid is well worth it. Or the raid is well worth playing the raid. If it's worth the grind, it's up to you. But yeah, that is Destiny. Rise of Iron. It's out on PS4, Xbox One right now.